Good morning. I'm Sana, and you're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. Every Monday morning, I'm joined by experts from across the country who are investigating our most pressing social issues and common curiosities. Over the next hour, you'll learn about their inspirations, motivations, and of course, what they know about the world around us. So grab that cup of coffee and get ready for a fun and insightful conversation. In today's era of social media, everyone's an influencer, which means that everyone, yes, me and you, can also be a producer of propaganda. And it also means that everyone, again, me and you, can also be manipulated. Now, propaganda may sound like a big, scary word, but it's important to understand what propaganda is in our current digital age, what it looks like, and its implications for our political discourse, for what we believe about democracy, popular opinion, and political consensus. Dr. Samuel Woolley delves into the people and the processes behind fake news, bots, and algorithms in his latest book, Manufacturing Consensus: Understanding Propaganda in the Age of Automation and Anonymity. Dr. Woolley is a writer, researcher, and professor whose work focuses on how new media tools get used for both freedom and control. His previous book, The Reality Game: How the Next Wave of Technology Will Break the Truth, discusses the ways digital disinformation and propaganda are already being spread using virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and other novel technologies. He is also the co-author with Nick Monaco of Bots and co-editor with Dr. Philip N. Howard of Computational Propaganda. Dr. Woolley is a faculty member in the School of Journalism and Media at the University of Texas at Austin. He is also the program director of the Propaganda Research Lab and a Knight Foundation faculty fellow at the Center for Media Engagement. His academic work has appeared in numerous academic journals, and he has written extensively for popular outlets. His research has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, among others. He is the co-creator of the Computational Propaganda Research Project, now based at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, and the founder of the Digital Intelligence Lab at the Institute for the Future, a 50-year-old think tank based in the heart of Silicon Valley. His latest book, what we'll be talking about today, Manufacturing Consensus: Understanding Propaganda in the Age of Automation and Anonymity, is an in-depth exploration of social media, an emergent technology that details the inner workings of modern propaganda. Good morning, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to talk about this book because I'm becoming more and more, I kind of want to say obsessed a little bit about social media, about how we're using it, the way we're learning about the world and connecting with one another. And so when I saw your title, Manufacturing Consensus, I was immediately grabbed because, of course, I was thinking about manufacturing consent. And so I was like, okay, this guy is going to have something really interesting to tell us, something important that we need to know for the world that we currently live in.
I hope so. You know, the book was obviously inspired by Herman and Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent from the 80s. And in that book, they argued about the ways in which the broadcast media, TV, film, newspapers, the ways in which those entities and organizations were controlled by powerful interests, so much so that still today, over 90% of the media organizations in the United States are controlled by just 6 companies. And so I wanted to build on those ideas and ask the question, well, how has social media changed the game? We know that Facebook, Google, their parent companies, Meta, Alphabet, and then a host of other companies and frankly individuals control the online world as we know it. And what does that do to our understanding of the world? What does that do to the way that we get news? And honestly, what does that do to propaganda in today's day and age?
Such important questions because they have real life implications for all of us. And, something I find myself telling people is like Twitter is my number one news source. And it's kind of true. But after reading your book, I'm like, oh no. But, like Twitter makes it so easy to just get a quick idea of kind of like the headlines. And so you feel like, okay, I kind of have a pulse for what's going on in the world. But again, like I said, after reading your book, I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know anything.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's fair, and I would say that Twitter is great in a lot of ways, just because it's always been this space, since it was founded, really, that you can follow journalists, you could follow
Mhm.
academics, you could follow people that were doing the research and studying stuff, and then also find your own community in a number of other ways. Um, but the thing that I reveal in the book is that Twitter in particular, but also a number of other sites, YouTube, I mentioned Facebook, and all the other ones that you can really think of that you would call social media, can be controlled. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned in the lead up to the show, it's not just powerful individuals. It's not just powerful entities like Russia or the U.S. government or corporations that can control the way we think. Increasingly, small groups of well-organized individuals, sometimes truly grassroots groups that are coming from the
Mhm.
people, but more often than not, astroturf groups that are somehow connected to broader streams of money, are able to use these tools to manipulate the way we think and manipulate what we talk about. And so that's the stuff that I go in a lot of depth into in this book.
Yes, and we'll get into a little bit of it. So for listeners, you kind of already are getting a feel for some of the main themes in manufacturing consensus, but I want to take just a little step back so that our listeners really understand what we're talking about when we say propaganda. Because as you talk about in the book, we kind of toss this word around to kind of mean a lot of different things, or kind of stand in to mean a lot of different ideas. But could you tell us how you're thinking about propaganda and the specific type of propaganda that you're investigating in your research?
Yeah, definitely. So, obviously the core ideas you'll see right in the title are three things, really. So the first is propaganda, the second is automation, and the third is anonymity. And these are really, purposeful choices for me. We hear a lot of discussion these days about things like misinformation, which is the accidental spread of false content that anyone can do. We also hear about disinformation, which is the purposeful spread of false content that folks that are actually trying to manipulate people do.
Mhm.
And then there's propaganda, which captures both of these things kind of, but also a much broader array of ways to manipulate people, using emotion, using
Mhm.
selective kernels of truth. And so propaganda is at the core of this. And in its essence, like, I give a complex definition, and a more complex, but not really complex definition in the book. But what I say when I'm talking about propaganda is manipulating people using means other than logic. So,
Mm.
trying to get to people by twisting their emotions, by
Mhm.
trying to make them mad, by trying to make them check out or be apathetic.
Mhm.
Um, and so propaganda for me isn't necessarily, as it has existed for a long time, a bad thing. But what I talk about in the book are malicious attempts to
Right.
manipulate people. And so that's really crucial. The second and third things, automation and anonymity. People oftentimes say to me when they ask me questions about this book and about my past work, they say, well, propaganda's existed forever. Like, people have been trying to manipulate us forever. Like, how is this any different? And the thing I say is, well, two ways, right? Automation and
Mhm.
anonymity. Automation allows for propaganda to be amplified so that it exists in today's world on digital steroids, basically. The
Mhm.
internet magnifies our ability to access all kinds of information, but tools like bots, which many people have probably heard of because of the news, but also AI and newer tools like ChatGPT, these large
Mhm.
language models, they allow for the amplification of particular ideas. They recurate certain kinds of content that then manipulate oftentimes the algorithms, which are also themselves automated, that run social media platforms. And
Mhm.
so you have this kind of cyclical, annoying feedback loop where all behind the scenes, you have computers talking to one another that are being controlled by people who understand these things in order
Mhm.
to get certain kinds of information to be prioritized and other kinds of information to be pushed down and suppressed. And then
How new media tools get used for both freedom and control. His previous book, The Reality Game: How the Next Wave of Technology Will Break the Truth, discusses the ways digital disinformation and propaganda are already being spread using virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and other novel technologies. He is also the co author with Nick Monaco of Bots and co editor with Dr. Philip N. Howard of Computational Propaganda. Dr. Woolley is a faculty member in the School of Journalism and Media at the University of Texas at Austin. He is also the program director of the Propaganda Research Lab and a Knight Foundation faculty fellow at the Center for Media Engagement. His academic work has appeared in numerous academic journals, and he has written extensively for popular outlets. His research has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, among others. He is the co-creator of the Computational Propaganda Research Project, now based at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, and the founder of the Digital Intelligence Lab at the Institute for the Future, a 50-year-old think tank based in the heart of Silicon Valley. His latest book, what we'll be talking about today, Manufacturing Consensus: Understanding Propaganda in the Age of Automation and Anonymity, is an in-depth exploration of social media and emergent technology that details the inner workings of modern propaganda. Good morning, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to talk. And it just made me think like how easy it is for us to again, look at a trending topic or just something that continues to show up in our feed and believe that this is really what people are thinking, or even an idea or topic that a larger swath of people are believing in. But again, you talk about how bots are actually being used to manipulate, again, those trending topics and the algorithm. So what we're seeing isn't necessarily a true representation of how people feel or even what they're thinking about.
You've got it spot on. So the thing is with social media, with these platforms, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or other ones, they give you the illusion of having their finger on the pulse, of being able to tell you what's popular right now. They say to you, here's what the trends are. Here's what people are talking about. The premise that I put forward in the book, the argument that I'm making here, is that through the use of fake automated accounts, bots, but also other kinds of accounts that people run without putting their real name on them, what we call sock puppets, there's a lot of different ways that you can work to manipulate what those trends say. The social media companies, when they first built these things, didn't think about the fact that people would be trying to manipulate them for their own means and ends. And so that meant that early on, marketers, corporations, all these kinds of groups figured out that if they got thousands of accounts to boost a message or a particular hashtag or something, that they could get their product to quote unquote trend. And the social media company would then recurate that content onto their homepage and say, hey, everyone's talking about this. You should pay attention to it. The thing was that politicians and political groups quickly understood that too. And obviously corporations as well, because now we live in a world with Citizens United where corporations are very involved in politics in the US and around the world. And so now those bots and sock puppets and also a variety of other mechanisms, including like now coordinated groups of influencers who are paid small amounts of money, are being programmed or paid to push this content that creates fake trends, that creates false trends, that creates false momentum. And oftentimes the goal isn't to have the bot talk to you and get you to change your mind about something. The bot is trying to talk to the algorithm. It's trying to trick the social media company itself, trying to trick their algorithms so that they present you with information that's bogus or false or misleading or polarizing. And so that's the world we live in. That's the broader sort of like idea behind this book and behind what I wrote about.
And of course, in your book, you're focusing very much on the political implications for automation, for the anonymity. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I mean, there are so many examples. I'm sure we're all familiar with, quote unquote, stolen elections and these ideas of quote unquote fake news. But I'm wondering if you could give us some examples for our listeners so that we can really kind of sink our teeth into what's at stake in this age of automation and anonymity.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that listeners should know is that this has been going on for a really long time. So oftentimes when social media companies talk about, manipulation online, propaganda, disinformation, bots, stolen elections. They talk about it as if it's like this new thing that they just figured out. But this goes back all the way to 2010 and arguably before that to the early days of social media companies like Twitter and Facebook. Back in 2010, there's an example of when Massachusetts had a special election to fill the seat of Ted Kennedy, the guy that people called the Lion of the Senate, in that Democratic stronghold state. There was Scott Brown, a Republican, running, and Martha Coakley, a Democrat, running. And at the time, it was a tight race for a variety of different reasons. Some accounts online, and when I say some, I mean a lot of accounts online, started spreading messages that Martha Coakley, the Democrat, was anti-Catholic. Now, in Massachusetts, that's a pretty big accusation. And Coakley, eventually it gained traction. It started getting picked up in news outlets because they were noticing that it was showing up online and trending online. It also, other people started talking about it. Coakley started having to defend herself against it. And so it just gained more momentum. Well, some researchers at the time, some computer scientists, realized that, hey, this is actually a group of bots. It's a group of fake profiles that are being run by a really small group of people in Iowa, of all places. And they've functionally gained control of like a major narrative in this race. And the outcome of that race was that Martha Coakley lost. And, some people, say, well, how do you know it was the bots that did it? And you can't know for sure. That's part of the problem here. Like people always are throwing shade on these things and saying, we don't know what the impact of this is. But what I can say is that there are impacts. There absolutely are impacts. And in this case, Martha Coakley became known as an anti-Catholic candidate, even though that was a blatant lie. And in many other cases across time over the last 10 years, we've seen that happen again and again and again. So even more recently, the Associated Press just put out an article that I talked to them for, where there's a big group of fake accounts that have been pushing heavily pro-Trump narratives and crazy anti-DeSantis, anti-Nikki Haley, anti-Biden narratives. And so it's not just like Democrat v. Republican stuff. It's also Republican against Republican, or Republican against Democrat. And then it's also a global phenomenon too. So my research doesn't even just look at the US. In this book, Manufacturing Consensus, I also talk about how this has played out in places like South Korea, in the Philippines, across North Africa, in Europe. And what we find, my research team and I, is that there are people that are doing this kind of stuff, not just trying to like smear political candidates, but also all kinds of other stuff across the world.
Yeah, I mean, that is, and all the examples that you give us throughout the book, I mean, really just drive home how these different computational tools are being used, and for a variety of different reasons, or I should say by a variety of different people. We, as you mentioned kind of earlier, it's not just different governments, it's not just big corporations, but it's everyday folks who maybe have a certain political idea or allegiance, or simply are kind of just doing it just because they can, which I thought was also very scary, where it's like people are just because they can, know how to use the tech, they're able to manipulate it. And that kind of blew my mind too, because you think about, someone is doing this for a particular reason, to get out a particular idea, and that's not necessarily always the case either.
Yeah. So like the first part there, like you're so right. Like the first part is people have this perception that the goal is to kind of try to change your opinion about a candidate, which, is the case some of the time, as with my previous example, to try to get you to vote for one person and not another. But oftentimes these botnets and groups of fake accounts or coordinated groups of influencers and other mechanisms are used to actually make people angry or apathetic, or just try to get them to check out of the political process. Specifically, like my team now is studying the ways in which communities of color and diaspora communities are unduly targeted with this stuff in the United States. And what we find is that a lot of the messages targeting, say, for instance, the Black community in Atlanta, or the Latino community in San Antonio, those messages are trying to get them to not vote. They're trying to get them to check the political process. Now, the other point that you're making there is that anyone can kind of do this. And so it's not just organized political groups. It's not just like political parties or candidates or stuff like that. It's also, small groups of people like those folks in Iowa I mentioned earlier. It's also individuals. A lot of the people I spoke to for this book are individuals that have past lives working in and around, computer coding or software development, who have figured out like, hey, I can game this system. And some of them are doing it because they are, deep believers in a particular kind of politics. Some of them are doing it because they figured out how to monetize it. A lot of them, because they can draw ads to particular websites and that kind of thing, or also they can rent out their botnets. And then, there's the final group, which are people that are just doing it to screw around with people and to try to mess with people, the trolls. And some people are a combination of all three, and that's what makes this space so fascinating and worrisome. And also, it was one of the big reasons I wanted to write the book, because back in 2016 when I was at Oxford, people were having these discussions. They were saying, oh, Russia this, or China that, or the United States this. And I'm like, yeah, all of these countries are involved in the spread of propaganda. They're still the most sophisticated actors in the space. They still have the most resources. But the reality of the internet is that anyone can build propaganda. And until we start to understand that the amount of noise that's out there is created by a variety of groups, we will all be so receptive in a very bad way to being manipulated by this content. And so, that's part of the big reason why I wanted to explain this stuff.
Thank you so much for that. Well, let's take a quick break. This is Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm Sana, and I'm here with Dr. Samuel Woolley, the author of Manufacturing Consensus, Understanding Propaganda in the Era of Automation and Anonymity. Now, Sam, something that I'm sure our listeners want to know is, how were you able to talk to folks who were creating some of these coordinated campaigns? How were you able to gain their trust and really find out what they were thinking about, how they were even, again, taking on some of these campaigns, creating these bots? Could you give us a little bit of information about, building that trust, but also some of the different types of folks that you were able to talk to?
Sure. So this book is based on conversations and what I call, or what others have called ethnographic work over the course of 10 years, a little less than 10 years of work with folks who are building these political bot groups or commercial bot groups, that are buying them, that are working to track them and uncover them, and then sort of everyone else that exists on the tangents of that. So people like influencers online, people that work at social media companies, journalists and stuff like that who are studying this. The people do ask me this question a lot. They ask me like, how did you get to talk to these people? And there's a few different ways that I went about it. So the first honest truth is that I started doing this work early, and I was kind of a right place, right time thing. So in 2013, I started this research, and I started speaking to people then. And so that was prior to 2016, when Cambridge Analytica happened, and the Russian interference in the US election happened, and everyone kind of got wise to the fact that, hey, maybe social media aren't, like just good for democracy and good for people. Everyone started, everyone had kind of had these inklings, but they weren't quite there yet. And so because I was there early, I was able to reach out to people who were way more willing to talk to me early on than they were later. And also I had already built the relationships with them over the course of 3 years by the time, everything, hit the fan. And so that was useful. Those people introduced me to other people. We call it, in academia, the fancy word for it, which is not very fancy and is kind of funny, is snowball sampling. So like a snowball rolling downhill, like these people introduced me to other people. And the funny thing that I quickly realized was a lot of them knew each other. And then also they were all around the world. There's a lot of people that do this around the world. And a lot of them like to brag about what they do, especially in the beginning, but including still today. They think that they are, and rightfully so in some cases, that they are mavericks online. They think that they have figured out how to game the system.
Mm-hmm.
They think that they're getting away with a lot. And to be really frank, they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so because they were speaking to me under the condition of anonymity, which was a prerequisite required by both my university, all of the universities I worked at, but also, for the sake of these people and myself, so that they could speak openly and we could share this information with the public. They were willing to tell me stuff because they, at their heart, most of them are kind of PR folks, they're marketers, they're hype people. A lot of them are very politically minded. A lot of them are a little high on their own supply. And so that was like, another thing that was important to note, which was that I had to a lot of times figure out what was true and what wasn't true. And so I had to do a lot of vetting, and I had to ask a lot of follow-ups, and I had to check in with them often, and also ask for documentation and ask to talk to other people. And so, that's how I got access to these folks. It was a step-by-step process, and it included going to a lot of like advertising conferences, like reaching out to people online, like dropping into their DMs and being like, hey, can we talk? And then like more sophisticated processes, like, going through like professional organizations where there was like people that were involved in social media marketing, and kind of finding the I don't want to say the evil side, but like I want to say the side where morals were a lot looser than the other side.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Because I mean, again, like when you all read the book, you will like just the type of information, some of the things that the people you talk to that they share, it's really mind blowing because for them, maybe they are kind of flexing some of their technical skills, right? Or getting excited that they were able to maybe game an algorithm to pick up, whatever it is that they're trying to talk about or whatever it is they want you to feel. But for, just kind of, I guess, like an everyday person who is going to social media and believes there's something there that can tell me what's going on in the world or how people are feeling. I was like, oh my goodness, it's all a lie. It's all a lie.
Yeah.
Particularly as you were talking about how journalists will use some of these trending topics or even retweets or likes or, some of these numbers as evidence of, hey, people are feeling, whatever feeling towards this topic, this social issue, this candidate, and how that isn't necessarily telling us the truth and then can lead us to some very dangerous conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I mean those are the ideas at the heart of the book, like, and really what it's about is these folks' stories
Mm-hmm.
and the reality of what they're able to achieve and what they want to be able to achieve. And so I think that's what people have to tune into here is like, yes, there are narratives going around, spread by politicians for their own means and ends, but also by academics and others that say
Mm-hmm.
none of this really matters. Disinformation online doesn't actually impact people. Bots don't have an impact. Like, we don't actually know what the problem is, or actually the problem's way overblown. And so, I tried to go back directly to the source, to the people that make and build this stuff and that track it, in order to learn exactly what the consequences of this stuff are. And I realized really quickly that there are a lot of consequences, and it is mind-blowing what these people are able to achieve. They're able to manufacture virality. They create fake virality online. They're able to create basically fake influencers. They're able to coordinate groups of influencers that people know and love and follow for their other kinds of content, and then get them to lend their profile and their popularity and their platform to spread political messaging increasingly now in a way that we don't know it's coming from another group that's paying them. And the other thing too, like, is that we talk about outcomes of manipulation of people online, oftentimes only in the context of like whether or not it led to an election being won or lost, or
Mm-hmm.
whether it led to an election being stolen, if you talk to some people. But what I found in writing this book and in doing this research over the last decade or so is is that it's oftentimes marginalized communities,
Mhm.
people of color, journalists, women. Those are the groups that are oftentimes the targets of computational propaganda, manipulation online, and this manufactured consensus. And their stories oftentimes don't get told. And so one of the things I tried to do in this book is lift those stories up and say, listen, if you want to look at impact, talk to these communities, talk
Mhm.
to journalists, talk to women, and you'll find really quickly that many of these people have experienced these attacks.
Mhm.
They've been on the receiving end, and it stopped them from continuing to be a journalist, or it
Mhm.
stopped them from speaking out online, or it stopped them from believing in democracy. And these outcomes are serious, serious outcomes that we need to be paying attention to.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because, of course, we're not just talking about how social media can lead us to this consensus of feeling, again, which I think is important in itself, too, that anger, the apathy, that polarization that you talked about, but also how through these coordinated attacks that, as you mentioned, journalists can think twice about, topics that they want to write about or the ways that they write about them, or even, academics and particularly communities of color who have used the internet in order to connect with one another, but also bring attention to a variety of different social issues. People can feel very afraid to continue to do that work in a way that will draw more attention, right? And so then what happens? Not only to those folks and their very real lives, right? Because we do see sometimes those threats online materialize into threats in the physical world, but also what happens when we know less about what's happening, right, to marginalized groups, and when we know less and have less nuanced conversations about some of these social issues. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. I know even in the book you mentioned at a time you were also right being attacked by some bots and maybe questioning a little bit about how you're going to talk about certain things for a short period of time.
Yeah, definitely. So a relatively new phenomenon in this space, like not new, but something that a lot of people are talking about right now, is that researchers are who study this stuff are now
Mhm.
getting attacked a lot. And I think this is the logical progression of this kind of new way of spreading manipulation and falsehood. That when people don't know about it, when most people are not familiar with it, they're the ones that are being targeted because they're
Mhm.
easier to trick.
Mhm.
And then there's an attempt to try to get also journalists to recreate bogus information because they're working on tight deadlines,
Yeah.
and it's hard for them to find good sources all the time. So they're looking to social media for trends and other things that inform their reporting. And then now, the researchers who continue to dig into this stuff and uncover the ways in which disinformation and manipulation flow are being targeted. And so, sure, that means that people like me have been targeted, but also, and more, much more importantly, it means that a lot of women, a lot of
Mhm.
faculty of color, and others in this space who are really trying to speak on behalf of particular communities and to particular communities are also threatened with being silenced right now.
Mhm.
And it's a scary place to be. It always kind of has been a scary place to do work, but it's a scary place to be right now, especially for those people who are operating from a very different position than someone like me, who is a white cis male, who has a faculty position at a big university in Texas. And so I say all of this to say that these tools, these mechanisms are especially powerful. Just to reiterate what you were saying and what I said earlier, they're especially powerful at taking the voice away from people who already lack any kind of way to really speak in our political system and our commercial system. And so
Mhm.
that to me is a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take another short break. I'm Sanaa, and you're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. This is Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm Sanaa, and I'm here with Dr. Samuel Woolley, the author of Manufacturing Consensus, Understanding Propaganda in the Era of Automation and Anonymity. Now, before the break, we were talking a lot about the perils of social media, in particular, how it can be manipulated for manufacturing consensus, consensus of feeling, or the illusion of consensus, but also how social media can be used to silence people as well. And so I'm wondering, because I don't like to leave the listeners on too much of a sad note. I like to have people feel like they can do something. And so I'm wondering, from your research, what is it that we can do as everyday consumers of social media and participants in social media? Because pretty much social media is all of our lives in some way at this point. What is it that we can do maybe to either be aware of when we're might be manipulated or be exposed to propaganda, or even what is it that we can do to try to protect people from some of these attacks as well?
Yeah, so the first thing that I want to say to people is there's reason for hope. I'm still optimistic about the power of the internet and about the power of social media. It's still possible to use these tools to connect with each other. It's still possible to use these tools to organize, to build community, and to communicate about important topics. Increasingly you have people moving to encrypted chat apps like WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram. Those places offer a little bit more privacy, but it's important also that people know that there's propaganda that spreads there too, and there's people that are in those spaces too. So you're not impervious to being attacked in those spaces. Now, all of that said, one big thing that's important is that more people are talking about this problem than ever before. In 2013, when I started doing this work, no one was really having these kinds of conversations. Very, very few people. And so the fact that we're even here talking, on your show about this is so important to me, because back then we couldn't even get the social media companies to pay attention to the research that we were doing. And we were in Seattle at the University of Washington. We would share our stuff and say, hey, here are reports on a bunch of fake traffic on your platform. Here's a bunch of stuff about fake political traffic. Here's a bunch of stuff about maybe fake traffic around advertising, stuff that should really matter to them, and they wouldn't pay attention. But now that's all changed. And so one thing that I say to people is we've got to keep paying attention. We can't forget that this is an issue, because that is exactly what these people that spread this propaganda, what politicians and what, frankly, the social media companies want you to do. They want you to think that they've got the problem under control, that there's no need for law and regulation in the space, and that we just need to move forward. Nothing could be further from the truth. We need laws and regulation in this space so badly. There is still, the law online is still, so far behind what we see happening in other media. And people say, oh, well, if you use regulation online, you're going to prevent us from innovating. I don't buy that. I think that we need a safe space for innovation. And the internet right now is not a safe space for innovation. It's a space where only the people with a lot of resources that look a certain way and act a certain way can actually get the funding and the resources to make the money that people talk about so often, and to innovate the way that they talk about. And so write to your senator, write to your Congress people, get them to do something about this. Also, think about your own usage of social media. Think about your own usage of search engines, and arm yourself with knowledge. Go out there and get online and figure out what your privacy settings are. Figure out what data is being sold to these companies, because that data that gets sold to the companies that then sell it to others, these data intermediaries or data brokers, that then gets used to retarget you, and not just you, other people who look like you. So prevent that data from being gathered. There's different applications that are out there that are useful online. So if you're looking and trying to figure out whether or not an account is a bot on a site like Twitter, there's a tool called Botometer that you can just drop the account's name into, and it'll show you right away how bot-like it is, which is a useful tool. It's limited though, because it's only really in English and it only really works on Twitter. And so that's a point, right? We need more tools in more languages on more platforms, and we need more investment in that space. And then the last thing I'll end on is like, another reason for hope, but another area where we need to do work is education. More than anything, the point that I try to make in this book is that this isn't just a technological problem. Actually, it's way more of a social problem. It's way more of a political problem. And until we start to educate our children and also, our adults about the ways that information flows online and about how propaganda works online, people are going to keep getting fooled by this stuff, and it's going to continue to be able to rule our lives and to run our political system. And I don't accept that. I don't think you should accept that. And so, what I would say is let's create mechanisms for media literacy and information literacy in public schools so that everyone has access to understand the space, not just the propagandists.
Yes, I think that is so key, that media literacy piece. And particularly, I'm a professor at a university, you're a professor. So interacting with young people, you understand how little media literacy that folks have.
Yeah, that's so true. And everyone says, oh, young people, they know this space so well. And what I say to them is, that's not true at all. Like, actually, I just heard about some research out of Stanford School of Education that said that they showed false information to 3,200 students under the age of 18. And they asked them to say whether or not a particular video was fake or not. And it was so obviously fake. Only 2 or 3 of them figured out that it was fake. The rest of them didn't figure it out. And all they would have had to do was do a little bit of searching on Google, which they were allowed to do as part of this experiment. They didn't do it. And so absolutely, young people need this information.
Yes, I'm just thinking about some of the assignments I give my students where I ask them to find a reputable, credible source. And a lot of the information they bring back to me, I'm like, okay, come on, y'all, really?
Tell me about it. Yeah, I experience the same thing all the time. I'm like, you're here, you're in college, but somehow you got all the way here without ever really getting media or information literacy, or really, Sana, like to boil it down even further, like really getting a lot of skills in critical thinking. And that's just not only a problem of social media, that's a problem of our education system, right? We have trained our kids we teach for tests. We teach them for the SAT and for other tests. We don't teach them for critical thinking. We don't teach them to be wise to the ways of the world. And we've got to start doing that, because we're creating generations of people that are so vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. And that's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really key. And even as I'm thinking about older generations, like my parents, grandparents, the way, on the other end, the way they really trusted legacy media, the way they really trusted that news reporter on the evening news that was really giving them, in their eyes, unbiased, factual, information about the world. I think that also works against them as well, because now they go to these news sources that they trust and just accept that whatever, they're telling them is the truth. But as you show in the book, that's not true. I mean, we could think about the goals of certain, news entertainment companies, but then we can also think, as you outline in the book, how even journalists sometimes can pick up and report on different trending topics or cite different sources that, again, have been, manipulated, and it's actually bots and propaganda and not, reflective of popular opinion.
Yeah, and so that's a great point. And the older generation, they could trust at least that, say, like Barbara Walters or something, that she had some checks and balances on her, right? Like that there was still the pursuit of objectivity, that that there was still a code of ethics, that the Society for Professional Journalists or whatever it was looking over their shoulder to say, like, these are the things that you need to do in order to create good quality news. Obviously, a lot's changed in the news since the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. But at the same time, like, that trust that was built in those people has been a detriment to people of our parents' generation, because they're more willing, and honestly, like, a little bit more gullible to the kind of information that exists online. They're getting wise to it now. I think they're getting wise to the
Mhm.
fact that a lot of people try to trick us, and so they're getting more savvy to what they share and what they don't. But the damage has already been done in a lot of ways, because part of the way that this propaganda operates, and the biggest goal of a lot of the propagandists that are out there, is to decrease trust in institutions, to
Mm.
attack the institution of the news, to attack academia, medicine, government, to make
Yeah.
it so that we don't believe in those things anymore, and so that we don't know whether we're coming or going, and we don't really we're all divided.
Mhm.
We've all heard of the term divide and conquer. Well, that's what propagandists try to do. And so the biggest thing that we can work to do now is rebuild trust in institutions through systems of checks and balances, through codes of conduct and systems. Like,
Mhm.
I'm a not a type A person. I'm messy. My wife would tell you that. I'm not super organized. But what I can say is that after writing this book and after seeing all the things that I've seen, there is a role for systems and regulations to play. And
Mhm.
it needs to be in this space more than ever. You see that with like Elon Musk taking over Twitter, for instance,
Yeah.
and throwing out all the systems that they built to vet trust and safety over time, which were definitely imperfect, but
Mhm.
still, we're still a system. It was still organized. And so that's one big thing that I think about often.
Absolutely. In the book, you talked to someone who had worked for a social media company, and they expressed a lot of skepticism that any of these big social media companies would ever really try to root out bots or root out the propaganda that is circulating. And I'm wondering, do you think it's possible that we will see social media really take seriously this issue of, the amount of bots, the way that their algorithms can be manipulated? Or is it too much of a, hey, they get more eyes on their platform, they get more attention, more advertising dollars through these trending topics, and so they don't really have an incentive to really seriously take this issue to heart?
I hate to say it, but we've got to have a redesign of social media. That's what my last book was. The premise of my last book, The Reality Game, was arguing that we need new social media. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, these companies oftentimes say things like we're building the plane while the plane is being flown, and I'd like to tell them, you need to land that plane, and we need to work on it for a little while, because right now it's not working right.
Mm-hmm.
The ways these systems have been designed, to get you to pay attention at all costs, to get you to focus on advertisements, not just the ones on the sidebar, but that are in your when you're scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
um, they're optimized for all the wrong things, and bots and sock puppets and all these things, they generate tons of traffic, they generate
Mm-hmm.
ad clicks, they support the profit motives of these companies. And so all of these piecemeal retrofits, like attempts to say we did this little thing and that little
Mm-hmm.
thing and we deleted these 50 accounts, it's laughable to me at this stage. It's like your
Mm-hmm.
whole system needs an overhaul. So in order for us to have something new, we have to invest in the next wave of whatever's coming in the media world. Let's
Mm-hmm.
not call it social media. Let's call it something else. And that's where we can look to young people for ideas. That's where we can look to spaces like encrypted chat applications that give us more privacy. That's where we can
Mm-hmm.
look to things like data cooperatives that give us more ownership of our own data, and think new and exciting things, and let go of these ideas that have driven these old platforms that I think are outmoded and aren't serving society or serving the individuals that use these platforms.
Thank you so much. I love your hopefulness, but also, these very real critiques, right? So I like hearing both of those. I know we're almost at the end of our time together this morning, so I just have one last question for you, because if I'm not mistaken, you are on Twitter. And
I
so
am, yeah.
I'm So I'm wondering for you, what is your approach to using social media? Knowing everything that you know, what is your approach? Because you are there. And so I'm wondering, how do you use social media? And are there any maybe safeguards or anything that you're on alert for as you're kind of navigating these connections that you make in social media and even the things that you say or don't say?
Honestly, like my approach now today these days is to use social media pretty simply as a professional mechanism. Like
Mhm.
I will use it to share articles I've written, or like, times when I've been on shows like this or stuff like that, or like, and so I just pretty much only use Twitter now. I'm still on
Mhm.
Facebook and still on Instagram, but I don't really use them anymore. There was a time in my life where I loved like using Facebook and Instagram. Like I'm not ashamed to admit it. Like,
Yeah.
I got joy out of it. And that time has passed for me. I'm way too skeptical of them. I also feel stressed out by these applications in my
Mm.
life a lot too, and that's a whole other conversation that some other people have had, like, that's really important. And so what I would say is, like, it's okay to step back. It's
Mhm.
okay to step back and rethink the way you use these applications. Like, to some extent, if you think to yourself, I can't leave these applications completely, you're right. Like, these are part of our
Mm.
day-to-day life. And that's why I think this book is important. Like, these things are inextricable from our work, from our lived experience. And so
Mhm.
you don't have to leave completely, but step back and think about how you can use these things in a way that serve you, in a way that
Mm.
serve your community, not in a way that serve the people that are trying to manipulate your your opinion, your perception. Because, if you just use them unthinkingly, if you just continue to post all the time, and you're constantly on, you're doing the work of others, and
Mm.
you're getting tricked, even if you're not getting tricked by literal disinformation.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Sam. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you this morning, and you have definitely given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sana. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you again to Dr. Samuel Woolley. His book is Manufacturing Consensus: Understanding Propaganda in the Era of Automation and Anonymity. And I have to tell you, we barely scratched the surface of this book. There is so much important information in these pages, and I really appreciate how he tells a story, right? It's while the topic might be difficult in some places to understand some of the technology of it all, a lot of the different terminology or concepts, Sam is able to break it down so that it's easy to understand, but also we can see these real world applications and also real world implications, particularly as he mentioned, social media is kind of just our lives now, right? It's we're all a part of it. It's part of our lived experience. It's part of our reality. It's how we connect with one another. So social media is not going anywhere, but we have to understand how people are using social media in order to try to manipulate us, in order to try to get to feel a certain way, and particularly ways that lead us to be more disconnected, right? Those feelings of anger or apathy or polarization, or to just get us to check out of the political process. And we absolutely cannot do that. This book, Manufacturing Consensus, I think gives us a lot of really tangible tools to understand the social media world that we're operating in. And I didn't tell Sam this because I was like, he doesn't need to know this. But I think the other day I was following a bot and maybe even had a conversation with one. I'm not, I don't know if I'm ashamed to say that because I'm sure we all have been communicating with a bot, whether we knew it or not. But I think I was able to pick up on it pretty quick. And I was like, wait a minute. Am I talking to a real person or is this a bot? I don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and block this account. So that's just to say, hey, all of us can be fooled. And that is really the one of the points of the book, right? That everyone can be a producer of propaganda and anyone can be manipulated. So we definitely have to stay alert and make sure we're aware of what's going on in our social media surroundings. So that book again is Manufacturing Consensus: Understanding Propaganda in the Age of Automation and Anonymity. Well, for today's positive note, I want to leave you with this quote that says, "Connection is the energy that is created between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment." And that's a quote from Brene Brown. I thought this was so appropriate as we're talking about social media. And of course, in manufacturing consensus, we're talking about the ways that people can use social media for with malicious intent. But of course, as you heard in our conversation, there is still a lot of hope for how social media can be used as a tool to connect with one another. And so I just wanted to leave you with that reminder that connection is the energy that is created between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment. And maybe that is the way that we can approach how we're using social media, where we can feel seen, heard, and valued, and where we can also see other people and hear them as well. Well, this has been Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm Sana. I'm here every Monday morning, and you probably want to share this conversation with a friend. So guess what? Go ahead, subscribe to Let's Grab Coffee in podcast format. That way you can re-listen, you can share these episodes, and also you can get those alerts for when we have a new episode as well. I can't wait to be back here with you again next Monday morning.